All right. Can everyone see my screen now? Awesome. All right, so this is in part a presentation, but also a conversation, because one of the things that I love to do best when I am around a bunch of other folks who work in programming is to talk about what tools do they like to use, and what productivity hacks do they like. So I'm going to go through some of my favorite tools, but I'm also probably going to not take up my entire time, because I want to hear from all of you what some of your favorite tools are. So I've kind of organized this into different types of tools, and the two tools that I call enablers are tools that enable the rest of the tools that we'll talk about. And forgive me if, for some of you, if this is starting out with things that you're already familiar with, but we will build from there. The first tool that enables all the rest is Brew, or Homebrew, which is a package manager for Mac OS. And Brew lets you install all of your applications from the command line. So if we wanted to find an application, we can do a Brew search and then the name of the application. You can also find out more details about an application by typing brew info, or in our case, I know that I'm going to be demoing Engraft later in this presentation, so I'm going to go ahead and install that. And in addition to what makes Brew really interesting, well, maybe, is that Brew has an extension on it called Cask, and Cask lets you install .app applications. So you can install Firefox, or you can install iTerm, or whatever application that's out there that is not necessarily a command line tool, but is part of your daily workflow. So I believe Engraft is also a Cask. So I will run that. And you can also use Brew to install fonts. So for example, if we wanted to install our favorite program font, I want to open up another tab here while that's running. And I can do what's called a tap. So this connects Brew to another repository, essentially. And this specific repository, Homebrew Cast Fonts, has a number of fonts in it. So now I can do a search for, let's say I wanted to install Fira Code, which is a nice programming font with I got ligatures and some other typographic niceties. So now I can do a brew cask install, if I can type, on font Fira Code. And there's also a variant here, Nerd Font, that has all of the various symbols added to the font so that you can do things in your command prompt, like having all sorts of nice icons show up in it. Or if you have Powerline in Vim, those nerd fonts are nice for making sure all those glyphs are supported. And where this really gets interesting is Brew has a tool, or you can use Brew to install a tool called Maz. And Maz stands for Mac App Store. And you can use Maz to install anything that is out there in the App Store. So I know that one of the tools I use is called Shush. Shush lets you mute your microphone from a keyboard key, but Shush is only available through the Mac App Store. And we see it here at the very top. And once I find it, I can copy its ID and do a Maz install and then paste that ID in there. I'm not going to run that now because I already have it installed. But as you can see, Brew is kind of a gateway into installing all sorts of things on your machine. So wouldn't it be great if you could record all of the things that you install on your machine? And so when you start work on a new laptop, all you have to do is point Brew at one file and it will install all of your things for you. Well, it turns out they were inspired by Ruby's bundler and created this brew file format. And so now you can see I've got my tap command for the cast fonts, and then I use the brew command here to install a bunch of tools, and then I install some other applications, and finally I install a few things from the Mac App Store. So you can build up a brew file, and then the next time you move to a Mac, you can run brew bundle and sit back, grab some coffee, and wait while it loads up all of these applications on your machine. There are some tools out there that, like Thoughtbot's laptop, that expand on the brew file to make a very rich system for provisioning your Macintosh.
Probably getting yelled at for that because they want like normal hair.
There are ways of expanding this out to handle all of your provisioning needs. The next tool that I'm going to move on to is one called Tldr, and Tldr is fantastic because I have a hard time reading man pages. They are too long and too boring, and often the information I need to find is buried deep within them. So Tldr gives you a shortcut for that. So rather than me reading through the man file for tar, I can run Tldr tar, and it will give me examples to common tasks with tar. And I can say, oh, okay, yes, it's tar czf to create a gzip tard file. So between Brew and Tldr to remind me how to use the tool, Brew to install the tools, Tldr to remind me how to use the tools, these two tools enable all the rest of the things. The next category of tools I want to go through are what I call daily stalwarts. These are everyday tools, the workhorses that I use on a daily basis. And the first one is RG or RipRep. And some of you out there may use Silver Searcher, which is AG. And AG and RG are very similar. Both are set out to be improvements over ACK and to run faster. And so it basically gives you a way to search through all of your source files for strings. I started out using AG, and then RG came along, and it was written in Rust and slightly faster and with some other niceties. So I'm going to do a quick demo of using RG here to search through a code base for to-do comments. And there are a couple different ways that I can say, okay, show me it in JavaScript files or show me in Vue files. And I'm going to actually use this route. Apparently no to-do files in this code base. Let me switch to one here that I know has a to-do in it. So there, it found my to-do. So RG and AG give you a fantastic, fast way to search through code bases. The next tool that I use on a daily basis is Hub and/or GH. I am frequently on projects where these projects are hosted on GitHub for their source code, and Hub and GH give me command line tools for interacting with GitHub. Hub started out as the initial tool, and GitHub said, hey, that's really cool. We're going to build our own official command line interface, and so GitHub or the GH tool came along, but it is still under development. It is kind of in beta status. Hub was kind of an unofficial project within GitHub, I believe. So Hub, there's one thing that is not yet, that GH cannot yet do that I still love, and it's Hub Sync. I run Hub Sync, and it will pull down it will delete any of my local branches, as you saw there, that are not out on the remote repository. It will pull down latest on main. So if I want to rebase, I don't need to check out main, do a get pull, and check out my task branch. I can just run Hub Sync, and main already has everything in it up to date. GitHub, or the GH tool, is useful for pretty much everything else. So if I wanted to create a PR, I could do it from the command line by running GH-PR create. And then after I create a PR, and I'm going to create a test one here, it will walk me through, assuming I create my branch. And it'll ask me for a title. And then once your PR is created, then you can view that PR. And if I pass in the web switch, then it will automatically open up. Well, it would have if I'd actually had some commits on this branch to make it different, but it would open up that PR in my web browser. So again, it's just another excuse to stay in the command line terminal and not have to reach for my mouse. The next tool is one that is probably familiar to a lot of Ruby developers, but it's actually the one I started installing over here, and that's Engraft. So Engraft is, like I said, is widely used in the Ruby world, but it's useful outside, like it is not specific to Ruby. And what it does is it runs a tunnel so that if you have a web app running locally on your machine, and over here in this tab, I've got a Node app up and running, I can run Engraft and say HTTP 8080, and it will fire up an address here that I can pass along to a coworker or client, and then my app breaks in the middle of a demo. So of course that always happens, but assuming you have everything properly configured, then you can actually demo your app and have it accessible on a web address that anybody in the world can get to, even though it's just running on your local machine. So very handy for testing and development. There's also, one of my coworkers pointed out that Engraft has another use. Let's say that you have a directory of static HTML files that you just run on a web server for some real quick and dirty testing. You can actually use Engraft and you can pass in path to it, and you can also password protect it if you want to, and it will start up an HTTP server serving the static HTML files on that path. I should mention at this point, I'm moving through this rather quickly because my time is limited, but also because I have all of this documented in a blog post, which I will post in channels. So you can go back and see all these commands and read more that I'm not even going to cover when you're back in your terminal and you want to try out some new tools. Another tool that I use on a daily basis is pbcopy, and this is one that a lot of Mac users may be familiar with. It is the command to copy things into your clipboard. So earlier I did this search for a to-do, and get back into the correct directory here. Nope, not the right one. So if I wanted to copy this into an email to a colleague, I could pipe that into pbcopy. And the output is now in my clipboard for easy pasting elsewhere. And people on the Unix side are not left out. There's a tool called Xclip that unfortunately has more verbose syntax than pbcopy. But that blog post that I mentioned earlier has a link to another article by a guy named Gary Woodfine, who has a nice set of aliases to wrap around Xclip and make it as easy to use as pbcopy. The next tool that I use on a daily basis is one called FZF. And FZF is a fuzzy finder. If you were around in earlier days of development, you might have used TextMate. And TextMate had a Command T shortcut that triggered a fuzzy finder. And nowadays, if you go into GitHub and hit T, it will actually trigger a fuzzy finder that is inspired by TextMate's original fuzzy finder, as are the Control P in Vim, Command P in VS Code, a number of other fuzzy finders. But FZF brings fuzzy finding to the command line. So for example, if I want to look through my do a reverse search through my command history with FZF installed, now I've got a much nicer UI for doing that reverse search that lets me see a list of commands that I can narrow down by typing various search terms. So it makes my searching through my command history much easier. But then you can also pipe it to other things. So for example, one of my coworkers created an alias for GitHub support for co-auth. And if you haven't seen this before, GitHub has a way, if you're pairing with somebody, to give them credit on the commits and the pull requests so that it doesn't look like they're just doing nothing while you're taking all the credit. And you can, in your commit message, you add this co-authored by tag, but it can be kind of a pain to type out the whole tag and remember your co-worker's name and what their email is. So my coworker set up this co-auth alias that uses FZF to look through all of the people who have committed to a particular repository, and then I can do a fuzzy search. And when I select one of them, then they are piped to pbcopy, so it's in the clipboard with the co-authored comment. So it makes it super easy to do that right before I write my commit message and then paste the co-authored comment into the commit message. So as you can see there, that's strung together at both FZF and pbcopy. Of course, the beauty of Unix command line is piping stuff together in small tools that do their job exceptionally well and can be chained together to do even more amazing things. The next and probably the last set of tools I'll be talking about are what I call lurkers. And lurkers are tools that I have aliased to other commonly used commands, so I don't see them, but they're there and they're making my life better. And the first one is one called exa. And exa, what exa does is it's a replacement for ls. And so I actually have my ls, well, I will in just a moment have my ls aliased to exa. And now you can see my directory listing went from drab and boring to much more colorful and also, in my view, more readable. Similarly, I have a tool called bat, and bat is a replacement for cat. So when I want to view a file, and let's say that README there is a nice target, it gives me line numbers and the file title and syntax highlighting and a lot of things that are not present in cat. If I want to, I can pass in some switches which turn off give me a raw view essentially, that they turn off the line numbers, they turn off the header. So if I needed to copy and paste something, I could pass those in and get that. It is awesome for tailing log files. So for example, I can tail my Wi-Fi log here and have some nice paging set up, except nothing's working. Live demos are always fun. I can use this to look at older files on Git. So for example, if I have had a version 1.0.0 tag on this README, I could use this git show command and pipe it to my bat command. And I think this README actually does have a version 050. Oh, nope, guess not. Let's try 10. Nope.
A D in there, README.
Yeah, good point. We'll try that with the 50 with the correctly spelled README. Oh, nothing is going my way tonight, folks. The last tool that is a lurker is one called GRC, and it stands for, well, actually, I forget what it stands for, but it's for colorizing your output. So, for example, if I were to run a ping command, this is your typical ping command, but if I start out with GRC, then I've got some nice colorized output. And that's fine. Like, that is a nice way to get into GRC initially. But where GRC really gets cool is you can set up config files for it. For example, if you're doing Rails development, you could set up a Rails conf file, and you can set a regular expression in that file and say, find in my log file, find everything that has error in it and make the background red and the foreground white. And so running GRC Rails server means that all of your errors in your server, the server logs are scrolling by, are going to be highlighted in nice red and white text. So it's really going to make your errors pop as you're looking through these long stack traces. I'm not going to get into that because that takes a little bit more time to configure. But that's a real quick overview of some of my favorite tools. And I'd love to hear in the few minutes we have left here of what tools you guys have that you love to use. And I'm also going to post my link to my blog post here in channel. Maybe. There we go. So I see Steve is on Team Emacs, editor pull yours. Are there any other tools out there that people like to use or that make their lives easier on a daily basis?
Can people hear me?
Yep.
So, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say I personally use Docker almost every day for something. I used one today, which was this question came up: is it better to use find FD, which is a Rust replacement for find, or locate, which is faster, or just doing a grep on a list of files, right? So I used Docker to set that up, and turns out that just doing fgrep is really fast. If you use, I didn't have RG, but I had AG. AG is the fastest so far of all the methods that I've tried so far.
Yeah, I'd be really curious how it holds up if you get a chance to try it.
I'm gonna try it. I was, Barcamp happened, and then I couldn't get the binary installed in the Docker file quick enough, so I had to give up on it. But yeah, I'll post something later. But it was pretty interesting. But we're not talking huge amounts of time, like hundredths of a second difference between the variations.
One of the tools that I use on a pretty regular basis, I didn't get to mention here, but is covered in the blog post, is JQ for Json Query. And it lets you pipe JSON from if you curl API endpoint, you can pipe the JSON that you get back from that endpoint to JQ and use that to search through that JSON response and narrow it down to a specific subset of data. So pretty handy. Another one that occurred to me, I was actually using, as we were talking about Rust things, I've been using recently Starship, which is a customized prompt written in Rust. So it gives me some niceties on my prompt that are still pretty speedy, being Rust-based. Wanted to thank you all for hanging out at yes, power level 10K is pretty awesome. Another great power line font or prompt customization to check out if you haven't seen it before. But yeah, thanks for hanging out, and it's fun to be able to participate in Barcamp again, despite being not in the Grand Rapids area. So thank you all for coming.